Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time today to join us for the St. Bernard Chamber's annual April Luncheon, State of the Parish. My name is David Clement Sr. I'm the 2023 Chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. I would like to begin today's program by thanking the St. Bernard Parish government for partnering with us for today's event. We appreciate your continued support of our organization. I would also like to thank our 2023 sponsors. It is through their support that we are able to continue to fulfill our mission in providing the resources and representation essential to the success of our business community. It is now my distinct pleasure to turn over the State of the Parish program over to your favorite parish president and mine, Mr. Guy McInnis.
So welcome. We haven't done this in a while. COVID and a lot of other different things happened. I want to thank the Chamber for all you do for St. Bernard Parish all during the year. Today is wonderful. We get an opportunity to talk to your members. So thank you so much. I want to thank our staff for putting this venue together. Every time we do something in St. Bernard Parish, our staff, the A-team, is better than any other venue in the region, in the state, when we go to these kinds of events. Thank you so much to our staff. There is so much to be thankful for here in St. Bernard Parish. We have a real story to tell. One of pride, one of accomplishment, and one of faith.
I'm gonna need you to raise your glass. I don't care what you put in it. Here's the nights that you can't take back. We live hard, but we love to laugh. And we all thought that we'd get rich fast. Hopped the plane out for greener grass. Found out the greenest cash don't compare to the friends that last. See, we won't forget where we came from. This city won't change us. We beat to the same drum. No, we won't forget where we came from. This city can't change us. We beat to the same drum, the same drum. And no matter where we go, we always find a way back home. So here's to the cheap sunglasses, Red Bull and minivans, and people who had your back when the world didn't understand. See, we won't forget where we came from. The city won't change us. We beat to the same drum. No, we won't forget where we came from. The city can't change us. We beat to the same drum, the same drum. Find our way back home.
Our reputation and image in the region is better today than it ever was. With that brings enormous opportunities. Rooftops, new businesses, tourism, federal and state dollars. Respect. We continue to work hard on projects to provide a quality of life, a better quality of life, that is St. Bernard Parish. Cleaning the gateway to St. Bernard Parish, Parish Road. Construction will start after hurricane season on elevating the Florissant Highway. By the way, our project at Parish Road should be complete, John Lane tells me, by the end of the month. Bringing back Vista Playground. They said we couldn't start the booster clubs again, and now we're about to add another. I hated Vista, by the way. I played for Rebel Park. But I'm looking forward to reopening Vista Playground. Bike and walking paths on the 40 Arpent and Mississippi River. Rebranding of St. Bernard with local artwork displayed throughout our parish on our neutral grounds. That's coming. Coastal continues to bring projects to protect our way of life in eastern St. Bernard. This year, another $200 million in the till for St. Bernard Parish. And that brings our total in 7 years to over $1 billion. Thank you, John Lane, George Ricks, and Jerry Graves. An expansion of Torres Park. A walking path north to the 40 Arpent Observatory, where there will be a new $4 million facility hosting all of our community events. Thank you to the Miro Foundation for the land donation to make that happen. And by the way, our finance department is on our 7th straight year of clean audits and reporting awards. The great news is we got a bunch of money in our budget. The bad news is Ronnie Alonzo's the only one who knows where all the money's at. And the good news is Ronnie Alonzo's the only guy who knows where all the money's at. Those are just a few of the examples of progress that we have going on here in St. Bernard Parish that we are all proud of. However, today we wanted to bring light to a few St. Bernard gems that make the state of our community strong. Some things that we may not know about, some of the things that don't get talked about a lot. Our River House Crevasse, Fozenville, Campos Marina, Veretteville, the Ark, the League of Angels, Fort Beauregard, our Pearl Harbor Monument, our historic Ford plant. People don't know what went on there not too long ago. And Serenan's gas station.
Serenan service. 1927, my dad started the business. This was a blacksmith shop was in the back there. My grandfather was a blacksmith, and my two uncles were blacksmiths. And my dad didn't want to be a blacksmith, so they built a service station for him. And that was in 1927. They told him he was crazy to come out here. There was nothing but weeds. That was a canal there. You had Ford Motor Company out there on the river. They were putting cars together there. You know how many cars you had at that time when they opened this up in 1927? They had cars you had to crank to get them started. That's why they opened it. They were way ahead of their time. When I became 12 years old, I came here and I just started pumping gas, that's all. And before you know it, I was fixing flat tires and everything else. And we fixed truck tires, bus tires, tractor tires. We had a contract with the police juries for 30-something years. I fixed every tie that belonged to police jury in this parish. And at that time, we used to open up at 5 o'clock in the morning and stay open till 9 o'clock at night. And I do my homework right on this desk. We always lived around this area here. I lived in Araby Park with my dad, and then I bought a house when I got married. That's my life. I got married. I've been married 62 years. I mean, what else can I tell you? I got 3 beautiful daughters, 6 grandkids, 3 great-grandkids, you know. And that's my life, though. This is, my dad worked here, and he lived to 79 years old when he passed away. 2 weeks before he died. This was his business. My grandson DJ works for me now, and he could be the eventually he's the owner. That's what we're grooming him for. So I hope he makes it.
How cool is that? You know, the full service gas station here in St. Bernard Parish. I don't know if we have another one in the region. And when you pull up, don't get out of your car. Mr. Allman gets really upset at you, I can promise you. But go by and get a tank of gas from Mr. Allman and have a discussion. You'll enjoy it. Theodore Agraria. Not many in this room know who that is. Chief Fernandez knows who Theodore is. They called him Ted. He lived on Violet Canal. He was a hunter, fisher, trapper with his family. They were from Philippine ancestry. Proud Filipinos landed here in St. Bernard Parish. This is where they migrated to the United States of America, right here. And we have a huge contingent of ancestry from the Filipinos. I know we got Mr. Wimpy here today and his lovely wife Doris, who I believe is a family member of Theodore's. Thank you guys for being here today. We have a council member who is one of our council members, Howard Luna, same type of ancestry. Thank you for being here today, Councilman Luna. He was born in 1895. And when World War I came, he and his 3 brothers volunteered for service. Ted had an ailment that prohibited him from serving. So he lied his way into combat. He had to go to Mississippi. Lied his way into combat. Right here in St. Bernard Parish, all of the names of the residents of St. Bernard are on this altar here at the cemetery at St. Bernard Catholic Church. In May of 1918, that's when Ted enrolled for service. He was killed in battle that October, and his remains are just yards from where he perished on the battlefield. Many St. Bernardians' names are on that tomb. He was the only one to be killed in battle. That's something a lot of you didn't know about. There's a huge story about him and his family migrating here, and their ancestors are still in St. Bernard today. That brings us to why, these connections, why are we so lucky here in St. Bernard Parish? Public service, which everybody in here does, is for a reason. We're connected. And how are we connected? More than anything we do, chamber, elected officials, schools, how are we connected? It's through our faith. In St. Bernard Parish, through our faith is what makes us strong. In the state of your parish, that faith is stronger today than it ever was. So we felt it appropriate to have Bill Hyland, and if I read everything, I'd be up here for another 30 minutes, and I won't. Bill Hyland was born in New Orleans in 1958. He's the assistant parish historian, St. Bernard Civil Parish, 1977 through 1985. He was working with the first parish historian, Frank Fernandez. He is our parish historian. from 1985 to the present. As a site manager at the Los Isleños Museum Complex from 1997 to present. Assistant to the parish president from 2002 to 2008. He's assistant to the chief administrative officer in St. Bernard Parish in 1988 through 1992. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Hyland.
So it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to be here with all of you today. And I will do my best to tell you in overview form about a topic that could fill volumes. Now let's see if this thing will. So, for the purpose of this discussion, faith in this presentation is defined as action to build and maintain a community rooted in faith and responding to crises, and in addition to its role in founding St. Bernard Civil Parish. Roman Catholicism was the state religion of the absolute monarchies of France and Spain and was critical in shaping the total identity of colonial Louisiana. And of course, you know, St. Bernard Parish has its roots in colonial Louisiana. So, the first person I'm going to talk about today is Pierre-François Olivier de Vezin. His son, Nicolas, had a plantation that we call Olivier today, and that's where the second and last St. Bernard or Sebastian Roy School was. In any event, Pierre was born in Bassigny in the province of Champagne in France. He later settled in Quebec, and there he became the owner of an estate which produced iron. Governor Pierre Rigaud de Vaudreuil was appointed governor of Louisiana in the 1730s, and Olivier de Vezin accompanied him to Louisiana, and here he became the Surveyor General of Louisiana. And we're looking at a map right here that Pierre-François Olivier drew in 1768. This map is of the old Bertrand Jaffe plantation, which later became the Jumonville plantation. Jumonville Estates is there today. It was the site of the British hospital in the Battle of New Orleans. When he died in 1776, he gave a will, he dictated a will before a notary in New Orleans, and he opened the will with a prayer. And in the opening clause, he says, I ask God for forgiveness of all my sins. I ask those I have wronged for their forgiveness, and I look for my redemption in the life thereafter. And he goes on, it's a beautiful prayer. One of his sons, as I just mentioned, was Nicolas Olivier de Vezin. He fought in the American Revolution under Bernardo de Galvez, Governor Galvez, and was a very important man in St. Bernard Parish. But he had several daughters, and one of them was Françoise Victoire Olivier de Vezin. She was educated, as were all the daughters of the plantation elite in Louisiana, colonial Louisiana. She was educated by the Ursuline nuns. And she had such a devotion to her religion that she became an Ursuline nun. And she was known as Mère Sainte-Marie, or Mother St. Mary, because, of course, in the Ursuline order, there weren't sisters. They were always called mother. My mother also went to the Ursuline Academy. So in any event, she was the prioress. She was the president, if you will, the prioress of the Ursuline convent when the British invaded Louisiana in 1814. Andrew Jackson came to see her, and he asked her to pray for an American victory in the Battle of New Orleans. And she prayed ceaselessly from the end of December through January 8th, 1815. This is an image of the convent that is preserved in the French archives. The convent today is on Charter Street. It's the oldest documented structure standing in the Mississippi Valley. This plan dates to 1745. The convent was completed in the 1750s. And of course, today we have Our Lady of Prompt Succor Church, Notre Dame de Bon Secours in French, on Parish Road. And when it was dedicated in the 1950s, 1952, it was carved out of St. Maurice Church Parish. And Monsignor Bazou gave the valedictory that day. And he said how important it was that this church was built atop the battlefield and that the American victory happened and how significant it was. Now, the next person of faith is Pierre-Philippe de Marignay. He was born in New Orleans in 1751. He died in New Orleans in 1800. He was the grandson of one of the founders of the city of New Orleans, but for the purposes of St. Bernard, from his father, he had inherited a plantation which began at the mouth of Bayou Terre-Haute and extended to Lake Borgne and the Mississippi Sound. He kept the plantation that his father had cultivated for himself, and he donated everything behind that plantation to the King of Spain for the colonization of the Canary Island people. And he was named their first commandant. And very interesting, he also made a will in 1793. And again, just as Olivier had done, he asked God to pardon him all of his sins. He knew that his life and the time of his life was uncertain. And then, among other things, he left 100 piastres, which was, in 1793, a great deal of money, to the parish priest of St. Bernard to be distributed to the people who were poor in the parish who needed help. So the people of St. Bernard were always very much in the forefront of his mind. We can see here the 1779 act of donation signed by Marignay to the King of Spain. And then we go on, and I'll show you the Terre-Haute settlements. This is the earliest known map showing that settlement pattern, which went all the way along Bayou Terre-Haute, all the way to Delacroix Island, ultimately. This is the first parish church of St. Louis. This was the first church parish for all of Louisiana. This is the mother church for the entirety of the state. And it was built in 1727, and then it burned in 1788, and it was replaced with this beautiful cathedral, which was funded by Andrés Almonester, whose brother-in-law was Chalmette, and whose other brother-in-law was Pierre Denis de la Ronde. And those are names that are very familiar to us in St. Bernard. Here we see perhaps the earliest known map of New Orleans and the vicinity. This is housed in the Newberry Library, and it measures 8 feet by 12 feet. And it shows the city of New Orleans, as you can see. If you look all the way to the far right, you'll see a bend in the river. That's English Turn. That's today what we call Poydras, Louisiana. Then you'll also notice going back towards New Orleans, there's a point in the river. That point is today Chalmette. And so here you see the original configuration of what would become St. Bernard Parish in the 1720s. This is an image of St. Bernard. The parish of St. Bernard is named for him and also for Governor Bernardo de Galvez. It was the tradition in colonial or in 18th century France and Spain not to name something Governor Galvez or King George, whatever, but rather St. Louis for the patron saint of the king, or in the case of St. Bernard, San Bernardo in honor of the patron saint of Galvez. And this statue today is in front of St. Bernard Church. This is an image of what the original St. Bernard Church would have looked like. St. Bernard Church Parish was established in 1785. It was the first church parish downriver from the city of New Orleans. And this church was begun in 1787, and it stood until 1852. And baptized, married, and buried from this church were Western European colonists, predominantly Isleños from Spain's Canary Islands. We had free people of color, enslaved Africans. For instance, buried in the St. Bernard Cemetery, the original cemetery, is an enslaved African from the Congo. The Filipinos were right there in the mix with us at the very beginning. And here we see an article which was reproduced from the Times Democrat in 1893. And it talks about St. Bernard Parish, olden times in St. Bernard. And in talking about St. Bernard Catholic Church, he says in 1893, the history of this church may be said to be the history of the parish. And it truly is the case that so much of everything that was associated with St. Bernard in its very beginning involved this church. The commandant's office, which became the first parish courthouse, was located on the church complex. It was in the yard of the parish church that the militia assembled every weekend. It was also in the church that bandos de gobierno, pronouncements or laws of the colonial government were revealed to the public. I cannot begin to tell you how important this building was. And of course, this is what the church looks like today. This is the third church on the site. The church that you saw there was the 1852 church. It stood until 1916. And then this church was finished in 1926. And it was built under the direction of the pastor, Laurent Bauchu, whom I'll speak about later. Here we see the St. Bernard Cemetery. This is the oldest cemetery in the metropolitan New Orleans area. It was established in 1787. And here we see a wonderful marker, which was funded by someone in the audience today who will remain nameless. And it commemorates this original cemetery, which was there around the church. Now, this shows you a copy of an original marriage in 1800 from St. Bernard Church. It is of Manuel Molero and Ana Alfonso. So we have Alfonsos in the room, we have Moleros in the room. And it says that they were both natives of Icod de los Vinos. So this is one of the ways that we know where our ancestors came from, because the church records document it. And then, you know, how many of you realize that the Roman Catholic Church kept the first census records of St. Bernard Parish? This is a census record of 1801, and it lists white men, it lists free men of color, enslaved African men, the same for women, free women of color, enslaved African women. And can you imagine, in 1801, we had the staggering population of 619 people. But still, this is the beginning of St. Bernard. Where would we be without these records? And then in 1813, we see that there were major improvements to the original St. Bernard Church. So this is an account of those people who gave money or resources to support rebuilding and maintaining the St. Bernard Church, and also building a bridge to the present St. Bernard Cemetery. This is how we can establish that St. Bernard Cemetery in its present form dates probably to about 1813. And if you look at the date, if you look at the names, you'll see Mendes, you'll see Alfonso, Rodriguez, Campo, Núñez. Now, we know that the Catholic faith was first in St. Bernard, but Protestant church parishes began to come to St. Bernard after the American Civil War. And so now we are looking at an image of Samuel Smith. He had been born in South Carolina. He came to Louisiana with the Proctor family as a very, very young person. And then when the Civil War broke out, he ran away. And he joined the Union Army. And he fought against the Confederates in Alabama and in other places. While he was fighting in Alabama, he had a vision from God. His grandson told me this, Kibby Smith, Mr. Kibby, Samuel Smith, and we have Kibby's son in the audience with us today, the Reverend Raymond Smith, who is the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Verettville. So, Mr. Kibby told me that God told him, I will spare your life. You will live, but you will not kill. And you will return to St. Bernard, and you will found a community to enhance the lot of your people, my people, our people. And that's exactly what Samuel Smith did. He was able to purchase land in 1871, and that land he purchased from Marshal Verret. His wife was Elodie Chalère. The Chalères had an extensive side of their family that was black. So he was very much aware, Marshal Verret, of the plight of the black people, and he understood that something had to be done to break the cycle of plantation society. So he sold the land that became First Baptist Church and Cemetery in Verettville in 1871 to Samuel Smith and to other formerly enslaved people who had been on the Proctor plantation and brought that Baptist Protestant faith in God with them to Verettville. And can you imagine, to this day, the descendants of the formerly enslaved people on the Proctor plantation are still living in Verettville. And they're still cultivating rice, okra. They're still cultivating crops that their ancestors brought with them from Africa. It's a fantastic heritage. And so we've been very privileged to be able to work with the Reverend Smith and the congregation. Here you see what the original First Baptist Church in Verettville looked like. Now let me just say that probably the Battleground Baptist Church at Fazanville was the first official Protestant Black Baptist church in St. Bernard, because we know it was established in 1867. But regretfully, Fazanville is gone. It's only a memory. But because of the people of Verettville and people like Reverend Smith, Verettville is alive. It's still here with us in the 21st century. Here you see what the church looks like today. And here is an image of the cemetery. And here's this wonderful marker that was put up just last year. And it's in the church cemetery, and it talks about Samuel Smith and the transition from being enslaved to freedom. Now, there are many ways that we mark Christmas in St. Bernard Parish. And of course, we like to think and we know that it is first and foremost a religious holiday, a time to remember Christ. But we also have fun with it. And of course, our parish president, Guy McInnis, and his chief administrative officer, Ronnie Alonzo, have had a great commitment to Christmas in St. Bernard. So here we are with Christmas at the Chalmette Government Complex in Torres Park. But then we have our own Isleño Christmas at Los Isleños Museum Complex. And here we have Santa Claus with Catherine Serpass, with Melanie Coons, and with Kathy Ziegler. One of the other things that we do, we have at our museum complex, Santa on the Bayou. And people actually drive through the complex and we give them toys. And Tony Fernandez, of course, is the great taskmaster. And so he sees to it that we are at all times liturgically correct. But anyway, so now here we're going to get into some stories of faith. First of all, there are many people in this room who will remember hearing about the Trappers' War. It was a horrible episode in our history, and it marked a real battle between political forces in Plaquemine and St. Bernard Parish. And in this particular instance, the Isleños emerged victorious. It was really something. They refused to pay this person to trap land that they've been trapping for years. One thing led to another, and assassins were hired by this political figure to come up Bayou Terre-Haute to murder the people at Delacroix Island. This happened November 15th, 1926. The Isleños shot almost all of the assassins. They took several of them into custody. They roughed them up, shall we say, a little bit. And then one of our parish leaders, Oliver Livaudet, had advised them to be certain that they signed a statement that thus and so sent them here to kill the people at the island. So after they were very persuasive with these assassins, they signed the statement. But still, things remained at loggerheads between the state, local authorities. Finally, Father Laurent Balchou, who was the pastor at St. Bernard Church, had celebrated Mass in the building he just built. And he told the people of St. Bernard that violence was an aberration. And this he could say because he was a veteran of World War I, and he had been gassed by the Germans and survived it. So he knew about the evils of war and warfare. And do you know, after that Mass, hundreds of people left that little church, and from that time forward, at least the hostilities de-escalated. So it was a great, great, great step forward. Now, the next thing we have is the Lady in Blue. This is a story that was told to me by Alma Fernandez Flieger. Her nephew, Tony Fernandez, is in the audience. He heard the story too. And then, of course, his first cousin, Maria Snitzer, actually wrote this wonderful little child's book about the Lady in Blue. What had happened, to make a long story short, it was in 1918 during the Spanish influenza epidemic or pandemic. And lo and behold, Dr. Ducrot was called out to the family home in Old Shell Beach. And Dr. Ducrot went out to the house and he despaired of the life of this beautiful young lady, Alma. He said, "I'm so sorry, but you have to prepare for this young lady's death." Well, in the house, there was an area where holy relics or statues were kept, like a little altar. So Mrs. Fernandez, who was Martha Guerra, started praying and praying and praying to the Virgin Mary. And do you know that they heard a window crash in Alma's bedroom. They all went into the bedroom, and Alma said, "The lady in blue came, and she touched me, and she told me I would be well, and I'm feeling much better." So Mrs. Fernandez, and I knew Marta Guerra, she was a lovely lady. She made a commitment that her daughter would wear blue for 10 years. And then after the 10 years were over, she took her daughter to buy a wardrobe. And the daughter purchased everything in blue. And I never saw Alma Fernandez Flieger in anything other than blue until the day she died. This is another really odd, interesting story. This is about Clyde Molero. Some of you in this room may remember Clyde. He was born in Shell Beach. He went to St. Bernard High School. He was an alumnus of St. Bernard High School. He fought in the Vietnam War. He was a demolitions expert. And then he stepped on a landmine. It exploded, and the Army called Mrs. Molero. She was Margie Meneses, and they said, "Mrs. Molero, your son is in hospital in Tokyo, and he's going to die." She told me that she went to Clyde's room, his hospital room in Tokyo, and that he just looked as though he would die. So she kept praying and praying and praying, and finally, just as Alma Fernandez had described, Margie said there was a great blinding light in Clyde's hospital room, and the Virgin Mary appeared and cured him. So I think that these are all interesting stories that help to illustrate how faith has kept our community moving forward through everything. And then, of course, Katrina. Who would have thought on August 28th, 2005, who would have thought that by the end of the next day, this would be the scene in St. Bernard Parish? And yet we've come through it all. And were it not for people of faith coming to St. Bernard from all over the United States, even from overseas, even from Canada, were it not for all of these people coming here, where would we be today? Here we see the beautiful memorial at Shell Beach that recalls those people who we know who died. But I think in summation, it's very important to say that faith has sustained St. Bernard through almost 250 years. Thank you so much.